All right, let me pull up structuring a debate class. So while I'm pulling this up, one of the biggest things that I've learned over the years, and I've been teaching a debate class since 2013, to do the math, is that starting with novices or starting with students that have no debate experience or are really young and have not been exposed to the concept of having to really do critical thinking, is you really need to start from the absolute basics. You just need to come into the classroom assuming that they aren't going to know what an argument is. They aren't going to know if you ask them, okay, what's your warrant? They're just going to look at you and go, I don't even know what a warrant is. And you have to be ready to really just build the students up from knowing nothing into being able to defend a position, whether they believe in it or not, right? Debate is inherently a double-sided coin, right? Where students are forced to agree and disagree with a resolution so that they can practice having to be on both sides of a resolution. So we're going to talk about how I find it helpful to structure debate classes and some of the units that I put in place for that I use in my class or with my team. Some of these are things I'll use for the team that I coach. If questions arise as I'm going through these, I do have the chat open, so please feel free to ask me a question because I can stop in the middle and clarify things, and that won't bother me because some of this may be a little weird. I'm hoping not. So when you're developing your course, and these are probably pretty, these are questions, Shanna, that we always answer, but so you got to think of things of like, how long is your course? Is it a year-long one that the students have to take or that they are taking? Is it only one semester? Is it only, is it a shortened, condensed class that's only a few months? If it's not a class and you're just coaching a debate team, which also happens, how often will the team meet? How long will the team be meeting? And how much time can you devote in those team meetings to lectures versus practice debates? And then also if you have team meetings, right? If you have just a team, do you have the ability to have individual coaching time with your students? I thankfully do at the university level because my course load is thankfully broken into, I teach one class and all my other hours are dedicated to direct coaching of my students. So I require a minimum of a 1 hour meeting with me per week per debater. I also only have like 3 to 4 debaters on the team, so it's not that big of a deal. But in the high school and junior high areas, it's not feasible for those teachers because you have all of your other classes you're teaching, all of the grading, plus you're humans and you have lives away from the school, despite what students think, right? Like I've had students look at me and go, oh, you all don't like just live here? And I'm like, no, have you ever seen an actual bed in a school? I go home. So these are things, to think about. Then what is the goal, the biggest goal that you want your students? What do you want? Do you want them to just to leave the class with basic critical thinking skills? Or do you want them to leave the class having experienced competitive debate? So in my high school, when we took debate class, it was required that we attend 3 tournaments in the fall. Was it 3? Yeah, it was 3, I believe. It's all the way back in 2000. To be able to get an A in the class. You had to travel to 3 tournaments. That may not be possible here on the island, but maybe they have to participate in, you know, at the end of the semester or the end of the year, they all have to do 2 debates or something like that. It's whatever you want to set for your class. Next question is like, how many do you want in your class? Honestly, I would try to keep it at around 24 students. If you're doing specifically public forum, you want to keep the number divisible by 4 so that doing pairings are as easy as possible. Also, if you get too far above 24, you start having too many people that you're trying to keep track of and help. So 24 is a pretty good class size. If you have an odd number, I've had an odd number, I always just ask for volunteers for extra credit to do extra debates and stuff. And usually somebody will take me up on that. If you're gonna have a team, depending on the format, obviously you need at least, you know, 1 to 2 kids, usually at least 2. And then can you split the experience level? So can you have novices meet together and experienced debaters meet together? Or is the debate class going to just be, because of scheduling in the school, have to be everybody together at the same time? Because having everybody together at the same time, obviously you're going to have to do your meeting times a little bit differently so that your experienced debaters don't get bored and your novice debaters don't get overwhelmed. So these are just all things you have to think about. So for novices, so these are a couple of the main units I always use. The first is I always start with what is debate and what is critical thinking, because a lot of students, if you ask them, okay, what is a debate, what do you think, they'll either say 2 people yelling at each other, or American presidential debates, which are not debates, by the way. And you're like, okay, no, not really. So you want to introduce the basic concept of debate as being, you know, the idea of critically examining both sides of a resolution. Also for, I mentioned the PowerPoints and lectures I would be sharing. All of these units that I am talking about here, I have PowerPoints for you. I just got to figure out with Aston how to get those to you and share them. It should be really easy. We'll have it figured out by tomorrow. And I have readings that you can use. You can edit the readings as much as you want, but I have all of these things for you to use if you would like. But so what is critical thinking? What is debate? If you're only focusing on a specific form of debate as a team or in the classroom, you know, make sure you go over those rules. Explore, you know, where and why debate occurs in the real life. I like to point out that when the students ask their parents for an allowance or ask their parents to go and do something, you know, and they're having to say why they want to, that is a debate that occurs. It's just an informal debate. And so I really like to point that out. And then I love doing the SPAR debates with the kids. So just like what we did last night, I give them silly debate topics. And I always ask them, like on the first day, I'm like, what are some things you like to talk about? And then I'll make silly debate topics based on what they like to talk about. And just so that they can get going, it gets them speaking and it gets them really working on thinking through things. And for the SPAR debates, what I will do is I'll just pair them up and then I have them spread out in the classroom and they all debate at the same time. And so I'll just walk around and kind of check in and make sure everybody's talking and checking in with everyone. Then I do argument construction and research. So I'll have, you know, the basics of rhetoric. I always start with logos, pathos, ethos at the least, from Aristotle. Depending on the time that you have, you can add more. You can add Cicero, Quintilian, anyone else. Then I always use Toolman. If you want to change your argument, you can construction, you can always use another model there. I don't have anything ready for you that's not Toolman. And then I always do a how to research because too many students go to google.com and then they type in a really long sentence. And I'm like, that's not research, y'all. And so I teach them specifically how to use Boolean searching. And so these are two handouts that are from different university libraries that I came across years ago that I really, really like using because they make a lot of sense to any level of student. So the first one is just basic, what is Boolean and how do you use it? And, online search techniques. And it runs you through different things. And then it has the graphic organizer over here using the Venn diagrams, which are really common. Students seem to really understand from math class to use those. And then the other one is just another how to use it is just another graphic organizer. So I always teach them Boolean. I talk to them about using databases instead of using that the school has access to instead of just using Google. I physically show them the difference between using Google and using Google Scholar to find research for debate. And usually doing this, the students are able to do their homework faster because one of the problems or one of the comments I get from students a lot is it takes so long to find research. And when I start talking to them about, like, okay, how are you doing your research? It's usually the way they're doing their research that makes it really hard. And so when I talk to them, I'm like, okay, let's try this. They can usually start finding the research that they're looking for a lot quicker, and they don't hate doing the homework because it doesn't take as long. They're not having to read through as many different articles. And this will help them, when they're having to write research papers for any other class, when they get to university and they're having to write a lot of research papers, it'll make their life a lot easier. The next thing I'll go over is I always start as debating as the pro or the affirmative team. And I go over the main job of those, how to analyze, and then how to create and write your pro or affirmative files. And when I say files, I always mean more than just the contention. I also make them think about, okay, if you were the con team, what would you say against your case? And then you have to go and look up responses and have responses ready to go to those arguments as well, to really get them fully thinking about whatever constructive case they're writing. So I always start as the pro because it's usually easier for them to start with agreeing with a resolution. Then I go into debating as the con team, go through the exact same process, just disagreeing with the resolution. Then I go into crossfire. Then argument comparison. So we talk about how do you compare evidence from different sources? How do you compare arguments? And how do you compare impacts? And when I teach debate, I teach that an impact is not this is bad, right? So an impact, so an uninformed electorate is bad is not an impact, right? But what would an uninformed electorate result in is an impact. So I always tell my students that an impact is a long-lasting, long-term, permanent thing that occurs, not something that is just bad. And I always, in the comparing impacts one, I always give them the statement, war is bad, and I'll make them come up with reasons why war is bad. And then I'll be like, okay, so those are impacts, right? War is bad, large death numbers, economies crumble, infrastructure is destroyed, right? All of that stuff. Then I tell them, okay, let's also talk about war is good. And I make them come up and do research and find reasons why war is good. Usually it's, to overthrow a corrupt leader or a corrupt political system. There are economic benefits to war, depending on what country you are, if you're involved in the war or if you're just selling things to people that are in the war. And I make them go back and forth and compare these impacts and explain why why one is more important over the other. And that really gets them thinking again about why they need to go farther than just, oh, it's a bad thing. Well, why is it a bad thing? And then also get them to realize that what they may think is bad, someone else might think of as good because they have a different approach to the concept or the topic. And sometimes they'll change their minds. I mean, I won't have done anything except, okay, you have to go find, reasons. And then they're like, oh, these reasons make sense. And then they'll change their minds and they're like, oh, so this is critical thinking. I'm like, yes, exactly. So that's a really good one. The comparison and how to delve into arguments is a good one. A really good unit. And then I always, if it's just a class, I make my students participate personally. I do 2. So they have to participate as the pro team and they have to participate as a con team, so that they have to get that back and forth exercise of doing both sides. If it's a team, I make them travel to at least 3 tournaments. That's my minimum in a semester. They have to travel to 3 tournaments to get, for the university level, to get the scholarship. And traveling now with online tournaments is really easy. Obviously, we don't travel. We just go to campus and log in on the internet. But I will always have a very varied travel schedule for us, where there'll be some that are like 8-hour drives and some that are 3-hour drives. And the students get to pick which ones they want to go to. I'm not super, I don't dictate what tournaments they have to go to. We look at their schedule and make things around that. Okay, before we get into advanced debate, what questions do you have about any novice units or activities that I have presented, or concerns you have about being able to teach novices? Okay, all right. We are gonna move on to advanced debate. So this is where sometimes teachers get a little worried that the students may get to a place where they are better at debate than the teacher is or the coach is. And that's okay. I've had students that have been brilliant people that'll think of things that I did not think of, and that's awesome. So the first thing is if you feel like you have a student that's really excelling and really kind of like above what you can do, reach out to other debate coaches around, honestly, the world. Facebook has a lot of groups you can join for debate, for coaches, and you'd be like, hey, I've got a student, that really wants to focus on this. How can I help them? And there's going to be some debate coach out there that will help you. When I say that debate is a family, I'm not joking. Debate coaches will come to the aid of other debate coaches whenever we can, to ensure that the activity itself can exist. And because when a student really loves debate, coaches get really excited. So even if you're a coach in California, if you hear of someone in Taiwan that's like, I don't know how to help this student, The coach in California will probably be like, I've got millions of ideas. So it's really, really good. Some really good units to use for advanced debate. So one of them is debate theory. I do not really introduce theory to my novice students because debate theory is looking at why we debate the way we do, or why our arguments or styles of debate constructed the way they are. What are our norms? And there's a bunch of books and articles that are written about why debate should or should not be doing, whatever. And I talk about how debate theory, it can be used where if your opponent is not abiding by, a norm or a rule in debate, you can make an argument that they should lose the round because they're not abiding by that rule. A couple of really big ones that I focus on with students. First is presumption. And what that means is that when a judge enters a debate room, the judge is supposed to presume that the way the world is right now is okay, that nothing needs to change, and that the job of the pro team is to prove why something should change. That changes a bit in public forum depending on the resolution, right? So for non-policy, right, the resolution was about the English proficiency exam not being continued, which would mean that the judge should presume before any debate has happened that the English proficiency exam requirement is fine. And then the job of the pro team is to say why the English proficiency exam is not a good thing. And the con team to say why either it's a good thing or that we should not change it. But with the resolution like social media is good for democratic values, presumption it does not always exist. So in public forum presumption, what is the status quo, and is something that you have to really talk about with students, that it really depends on what the resolution is. The next is defining words. And I spend a lot of time on this because especially in English, words have so many different meanings that you really need to be very, very clear about what you're saying. So for example, from last night, someone made the comment about, originally their opponent, either they were thinking or their opponent said cold coffee instead of iced coffee, and how cold coffee and iced coffee are two very different things. So you have to be very careful with word choice, to be very careful with defining words. So for the social media example for the resolution, right, what counts as social media and what does not count? Because if you define your words, you're like, look, social media is only this, right, as the pro team. If the con team doesn't say anything about your definition and talks about things that are outside of your definition, then you can tell them, hey, this argument doesn't matter because we're not talking about that thing. So let's say you say social media is only platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm really bad with social media. Let's say that that's your definition. And your opponents come up and they're like, well, we want to talk about Reddit and we think and why Reddit is bad. Well, the pro team could stand up and be like, look, Reddit doesn't count as social media in our definition. The con team didn't disagree with our definition. So this argument about Reddit does not matter in the debate. And it can really help the team, get out of having to defend absolutely everything and really narrowing the debate down to something specific that's much easier for them to defend and understand. And then frameworks. So frameworks can be extremely helpful in public forum debate because they can help narrow down what the debate ought to be about. So, for example, social media, you could say that Bob, I'll get to your answer. Let me finish my thought, and then I'll give you an answer to your question. So frameworks first. With social media, right? The pro team could say the judge should vote for the team that best supports the democratic value of freedom of speech. And then let's say the con team wants to support a different, or they think a different democratic value is more important. The con team could say, look, this democratic value is most important in the round. And then you can have a debate about what's more important. And it can really help you also, again, to avoid having to defend everything or things that, one side or the other doesn't feel is really fair to make them try to defend. And then it also narrows the debate down so it's easier for the judge to understand exactly what you're talking about. So the question Bob has is a really good one. Who has the authority to define words in the topic? And in American public forum, the way it works is anyone can define words in the constructive. Usually it's whoever speaks first will define the majority of the terms. For NTNU, where the pro will always speak first, for now, the pro team really should be defining words. Now, let's say the pro team says social media is only Facebook. That's it. That is a very unfair definition to the con team. And the con team in their constructive should say, look, this definition is too small, too restrictive. Social media should really be defined as this. And then the reason they would do that is so that they can make their arguments about why everything that's not just Facebook is social media. The con team only needs to define words or redefine words if they disagree with the pro team, or if the pro team doesn't provide any definitions and the con team wants to clarify some things. Does that help, Bob?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Then with line by line analysis with advanced debaters, this is, and Anthony and I spoke about this last night. This is always a thing that I make students do. This is why we have students keep their flows so that they can re-give a speech in a practice with the coach or with a teammate or something like that. Flowing is another one that there's always lots of practice that needs to happen. So you can do the card one that Anthony did with you yesterday. You can do that with the students. You can have the students listen to a song and make them flow a song. Any song that has a long list of things is really good. We Didn't Start the Fire is a fun one to use as long as your students haven't memorized the song, because it's just, goes through the decades and then lists a bunch of things that happened in every decade. You can make the students flow any songs that are rap or hip hop that tell a story, and you can make the students listen to each verse and, flow the summary version of every verse and they don't have to go line by line. They just have to be able to retell you what happened in that verse. You can also have them flow news stories or news reports, where they have to listen to the news report and then, in note form, flowing forms, shorthand, write out what happened in that news story so they could retell it the next day. Anything that gets them practicing having to handwrite notes and having to do it in a shorthand, you can never do too much practice. One of the things that I mandate in my classes at the university level is that students cannot take notes during my class on their computers. It is not allowed. You are not allowed even to have a computer open in my class unless it's a work day. You have to take notes by paper and pen or pencil. And that's just because when I get them to take notes that way, I'm forcing them to get flowing practice, even though they don't know it. Because there's no way you can get an exact transcript of what I say when you're having to handwrite it. So they're having to listen, condense, and write things in a shorter form than what all the words that I'm saying. So that's another thing, is you can ban electronics from your classroom, which is one that I love to watch the students at the university level kind of freak out when they can't have their computers. Too far. Another one that is really good is identifying logical fallacies, being able to see when they happen. So talking about cognitive bias, we talked about it a little bit yesterday with how as human beings, we can't completely take ourselves out of it all the time, but how can we check against it at least a little bit? And then also having them watch news reports, read articles, and point out fallacies that happen. Have them watch any type of political or presidential debate and have them point out when a logical fallacy happens. Any American presidential debate that you have or that you can find online is going to be filled with common fallacies of appeals to bandwagon, appeals to authority, appeals to how, the past is the best. Americans will always say, well, when America was great, that's what we did, and we need to make America great again. Anything like that, the students should be able to really start identifying and seeing when fallacies are happening. And then that will help them be able to, in a debate round, be like, hey, look, this is a fallacy. This is not good reasoning. You should not listen to it, judge. Rather believe our argument instead. Then the next is always argument creation, coming up with new ways to say things, coming up with new reasons why something is good or bad. Another one is round vision. And this one takes a lot of practice. And this is winning and losing arguments strategically is something to really practice with your students. When is it okay to give up on an argument because you're not going to win that argument? And which argument should you focus in on? So like I talked about earlier in Crossfire, how the debate starts out really broad. By the end, by the time we're to those final summary speeches, or in policy, by the time we're to the 2 ARs, right? We should only be focusing on a couple of topics, right? You need to be giving it, you can't talk about everything. Those first speeches are 4 minutes, that very last speech is 2 minutes. You don't have time. And so having the kids look at and be like, okay, what are you winning? Why does that matter? And teaching them to talk about those things and explain, be like, look, this argument doesn't matter. We agreed. Or this argument is more important because of the impact that it has. It affects more people. Anything like that. And making students do those speeches or redo those speeches so that they are being able to find things and point out when they're winning or losing and what they should go for is really important. And if your students can get really good at this, which comes with practice, this will help them win more and more and more rounds. It will also help them write better. Instead of trying to write a paper that covers everything, teaching students to let's pick out the most important things and focus on those in our writing. Every teeny tiny detail does not always matter. So it's just a really good activity or a unit. There we go. Another one is, how do you answer new or unpredicted arguments? There's always going to be a time in a debate where your students are going to be like, I didn't think of that. I don't know what to say. That's going to happen. And so you always want to talk to your students about what a generic argument is. Same thing as a generic question, right? What can you always say against something? Well, any policy, if you have, a policy that a federal government should do, any policy costs money, right? So always having arguments about why spending that amount of money would be terrible. And we shouldn't do it. Generic arguments will always change, but anything about that, talking about, well, really looking and making logical arguments about why something may not fix a problem. Anything like that. Also encouraging your students to realize they can make arguments without evidence, as long as it's common sense or is something that should be known by the general public. They don't have, they want to make the argument that everybody dies, like every human dies. They don't need a piece of evidence that says every human dies. We don't need that. If we, so letting them use their logical thinking skills to question arguments, to make logical reasons why the argument will not work is great. Another thing that's really important for debaters, for critical thinking, is being able to evaluate a debate and be able to come to a decision on who you think won the debate. And then writing out, why did whoever you choose, why did they win that debate, and defend it. Two things that I like to use. One is you can use 5-minute debates from The Guardian. And there are lots and lots of options for you on their website of different topics that are discussed. These are both in English. I'm sure there are Chinese versions somewhere. I just can't find them because I don't know how to search for them because I don't speak Chinese. Another one is called Intelligence Squared Debate. This is done by the BBC, both in Britain and in the United States. There's both versions. And this will have teams of 2 against each other. The Intelligence Squared debates will go back and forth. They have question and answering periods. And they will talk about, and they'll even talk about the audience, because the audience gets to vote before and the audience gets to vote after to see how much their opinions were changed by the audience. So having the students listen to those and flow them and then make a decision about why do they think one side won over the other. And then another thing that's really important if you're trying to grow your debate team or trying to get some sponsors, if you need to buy some equipment or pay for travel, anything like that, is doing demonstration debates or public debates. These are really good ways if you do them in front of the school. If there's like a big issue in the school about doing something, or a big issue in your local community about doing something, you could have the debate team create a quick public forum debate about it, present it to the school. And that will reach out to new students that maybe didn't think about debate or had never heard of debate. Another way is it's a really good way to you can invite the public to participate in these debates. So if you want to do a debater on the team and a public representative, you could pair them up as a team for the pro and the con and have them debate each other. That's another way that you can do it. You can use any model you want, as long as it's acceptable. So when I do these public demonstration debates, we generally use something very similar to the intelligence squared debate outline, because it's a lot of fun to have the audience pre-vote. Like, when you see the resolution, what do you think? And then vote at the end of, do you still agree with the same side, or did your mind change? And it really, it gets the audience involved and it's fun. Public forum obviously fits really well into any type of public debate. If it's not safe due to the pandemic or whatever, or you want to do some stuff over the break, you could always have the students do it and record it and put it up on a school website or a team website, and support your team that way, or a YouTube channel if you're allowed to do that for your team. Anything that can get the kids out there and showing the skills that they're learning will encourage more students to come, and will encourage more teachers or community members to be interested in what is this thing that we're teaching our kids, or that some of our kids are learning. Okay. Ha, look at that. I did cut enough out of Crossfire. Okay. So that's what I have about structuring classes, where to start, and then how to advance your class. So before we dismiss for lunch, what questions do you have about any of those units? Any of your concerns about teaching any level of debate, or anything I have talked about? What questions can I help with?
Shanna, can you talk a little bit more about framework? Because earlier you were using that one example. For example, pro supports freedom of speech, and then con may choose a different value. And then so how will we compare these two values in the debate?
That's okay. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So that would come down to argument comparison and impact comparison. So let's say it's freedom of speech versus, I don't know, freedom of the press, maybe? No, let's do freedom of speech versus an informed public, right? So the pro team could say people being able to say whatever they think, whatever they want, and share that with everyone is really important to encourage people to say things and think things and do things. The con team could say, well, we think an accurately informed populace is more important, because being informed and understanding who you're electing is really important to ensure that your country is run in the best way that it can be, and that the most people are benefited. And if we focus on freedom of speech, that's when we allow for incorrect information to be shared too easily, right? And so they would have a clash, and the debaters would need to go back and forth about which one is more important than the other, and why the judge should vote for that one versus the other one. And sometimes frameworks won't matter. Like if it's a policy, more of a policy style resolution, so like the non-policy debate last year, that was really focusing on, should we keep this or not? That really wouldn't need a framework in policy, but with social media is good for democratic values, right? Like really saying like, which democratic value are we focusing on, and why, and which one is more important than the other, could be a framework debate. Does that help?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Or is everybody just ready for food and a break from their computers? Okay. All right. Well, that's all I've got. We are not going to reconvene until 2 p.m. The students are still doing some activities. If you would like to sit in and watch any of those, if you're like, I don't have any kids to feed, you're more than welcome to ask. I can have Anthony put you in some of their groups, or you're welcome to just go and enjoy a nice 2-hour break before we reconvene at 2 p.m. So I will see you all later.
Okay.
Shanna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shanna.
Yes, Pearl, what can I help you with?
I have a question.
Absolutely.
It's sometimes the students cannot, they don't know when they can interrupt or cannot interrupt other people during
Oh.
crossfire.
Mhm.
So is there a rule that I can teach them?
So there's not a hard and fast, this is when you can and this is when you can't. What I teach my students is to always be polite, right? If the person has been going on for a really long time and is talking about things that are not related to your question anymore, you can say, you know, thank you, that answers my question, but I have another one that I'd like to ask. Or, you know, if they're answering and they're starting to really talk about things that, you know, might hurt you. If they've answered your question, you can still politely say, okay, thank you, that answers my question, that's all I need. As long as you're not just like, shut up, quit talking, and you're polite and you have given your opponents some time to make a full answer, you know, interrupting them is okay. But unfortunately, there's not like, I can't say, you know, if they've been talking for more than 30 seconds, tell them to stop, because maybe, you know, the question you ask needs more than a 30-second answer.
Okay, thank you. So as long as they are polite, and so the judges won't think that they are not being professional.
Correct. Yeah. As long as you're like, you know, thank you, or excuse me, I have another, you've answered my question, I have another one. Yeah, no, judges won't get upset. But if they're like interrupted, you know, if they only let the other person say a couple of words and then they're like, no, blah, 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 or they're really aggressive about it, then judges are going to be like, whoa, you got to let them answer your question. You can't just cut them off when they say 3 words.
Okay, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Other questions? All right. All right, well, enjoy lunch. I will see you all at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you can just leave breakout room or leave the meeting completely.